TJ Maslela here, host of Palatable Politics. We have come to the G20, covered, got insights, interviews of the first African-held G20 summit. Here are some interviews for you to enjoy. Comment, like, subscribe. Got a guest here that's going to give us insights into the G20 process and the role that they played. Our guest is none other than Mr. Kingsley Lenkokile, who's from the G20 Legacy Initiative. Welcome to the show. Can you give us some insight as to what the journey has been and what role you played in this G20 process?
It's been a rough journey this year. We started in February doing our work, and our work really is to build a knowledge hub, which will be a system, an online system that will house all the policy documents, communiques. We've gone further than that by including the storytelling part, where we're shooting a documentary that will explain the process of G20 so people can understand what G20 is about. So this year, what has happened most of the time is government to government. So government officials have worked hard with other government officials from the other 20 countries and even more, those that are invited. And of course, we've got African Union and European Union. All their countries are represented here, right? So they have worked with the government to government, building policies, writing policies in terms of what should be implemented, what should happen around the world, especially for those 20 countries. So they have worked hard to put that together. We've had engagement groups like B20, Y20, all those are, we call them engagement group. They're not really government, they're like the youth will meet and have created their own engagement, and they write their own policy and their own declaration as well. And all these people come from the G20 countries as well, and they contribute towards also the G20 to come and say this is what the youth thinks should happen, and the government can look at some of those things and say what can work and what can be implemented here, and they put that together as part of this as part of the G20 Declaration. Yes.
You mentioned that there were fine the G20 countries, but there were additional countries. Which are some of the significant countries that contributed to that? And would their contribution have been one of those nice to know, or would it have been valuable contribution that would be taken as seriously as the G20?
So when they're invited, they participate. They participate in the meetings as invited guests. There are those that are observers. There are those that are invited to participate in policies and engaging and all that. So in that element is that they will also come and say this is how this will affect us. So that's how it works. Yeah.
And then with regards to, I assume that there was a lot of knowledge, a lot of data.
Yes.
How do you guys consolidate all of that into what would be the declarations? Like, what's the process from the information and the respective groups to that of the G20 Declaration? How do you get there?
So, like I said, that is government only. So we have government people. So you start with the working groups that are led from South Africa by a different department. For instance, I'll speak of Department of Women that led the one that speaks of the policies around women, right? And they will work with their counterparts from different countries, right? Once they do their work, it goes on to what we call the Sherpas. Right? The Sherpas then will take that work and will work on it, but each working group also have to present to their minister. Once the minister feels that, okay, this is good, and they will sit together as ministers from different countries, they will adopt that, right? Those meetings took place around September, October, where the ministers came in different numbers to have those look at the final work that has been done. Then it goes and get negotiated by the Sherpas. That the conference that took place from the 15th of November all the way to the 19th, like it was 5 days, where they sit and go to the details and what will be the words, how are we going to put this, and once they're done, they agree. Then it goes on to the political leaders, and then here at the summit, and those leaders, once their countries have all agreed, each Sherpa will inform their country to say this is what we have agreed on, and from that point of view, each leader will come sit here knowing that they've agreed on this, and they will sit and just sign.
And then with regards to the information that you would have seen, what part of it would have excited you the most, would have depressed you the most, or given you hope of all the information you have come through?
Yeah. I think there are many things that impress me. First, it's around information owning our data here. It's the project that I'm part of, which is making sure how do we have our own information here. One of it is around AI. South Africa has really fought hard to make sure can we have our own AI and not use systems from outside. And what has happened, the UAE has come and say they're willing to invest over $1 billion, make it available for African entities that wants to drive any AI initiatives, right? The other one was Department of Women that were really working on a topic on positive masculinity. It's about us men. How do we deal with our own identity, and that so that we don't treat the women the way in which we treat them right in this country. A lot of femicide, the GBV, and they're working on that with other countries to come and say, how do we deal with the issue of gender equality? They have to also have policies on men to come and say, the policies are not instruction to men. They are to say, what can we do to work together to build programs that can help men work around positive masculinity. Yeah.
Thank you for your insights. Thank you for the participation, and congratulations on a wonderful job that you participated in.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
As thank you. Like, subscribe, share. Palatable Politics. TJ Maslela from Palatable Politics here, covering the G20. With us here, we've got a guest who participated in not only this G20, but G7's BRICS around the world. Mr. John Kirton, welcome to the show.
Good to be here with you.
Can you give us insight as to how this G20 has compared with other G20s that you've covered over the years?
At the end, it produced a substantial performance, about the average of all of the other 19 summits which went before. But this one did it against all odds. It faced the ultimate stress test from both within Donald Trump and without all the many crises in the world. And it survived and it thrived. Produced a declaration, which many people expected might not happen. And it was a substantial one, 11,000 words, about the same as the average overall. They contained 195 commitments, collective, precise, future-oriented, politically binding for all of the 20 member governments that were here at the table. And I think we'll soon see that there's more with the other documents that will be released. So above average performance there. And I think the most important thing to know is, looking to the future, Donald Trump, long before this summit started, said he would host next year and gave us unusual detail about where and when and what he wanted it to do. At the end of saying he'd boycott this one completely, just before it started, he said, oh, no, I'd like to be included, if at a low level, so you would hand it over, President Ramaphosa, to me. And the day before the summit started, there was another summit because of this one. It was a summit to replenish the money for the global fund against HIV, AIDS, TB, and malaria. And Donald Trump, despite his cutting funding for health and so much else in the global south, wrote a check for $4.6 billion. So he's said and tweeted all kinds of unkind things about South Africa. But if you follow the money, the one country in the world where AIDS is the number one killer of its citizens is South Africa. So he put his money into South Africa, for South Africa, whatever he was tweeting about at any time during the day and night.
We've seen a great emphasis on declarations, on getting the declaration done. What is the importance of a declaration and reaching consensus on it?
First, we're about a century away from secret agreements secretly arrived at, right? Especially because the majority of the G20 members and the big ones in the global north and global, we're all democracies, all right? And our people need that, demand that. And you really don't know if it's an agreement unless you can write it down on paper rather than he said, she said, and actually publicize it so everybody else can know what you've agreed to, but hold you to account. Oh, did you keep your promises? And that's what the G20 Research Group has done from the start. We take the declarations we need, we identify the promises, the commitments, and then we go home, and the day after, we see whether the member governments actually implement them. And the answer is overall, yes, they do. 71% is the overall average. B minus, pretty good, yeah, but needs to be a lot better. So how can we improve implementation, accountability, transparency? And because South Africa continues to be part of the governing troika of the G20 and will throughout Donald Trump's year, we're counting on South Africa to do a better job there, even though it's another unique challenge with Donald Trump in the central chair.
Just for context, the Troika is made up of the previous G20 presidency, the current, and the next. So in the next one is going to be South Africa, US, and the UK. But given that, Snap, the declaration that Trump isn't yet to receive, when he does get it, how binding are these declarations, or how much does it confine and limit what he doesn't do towards the G20 declaration and whatever objectives have been decided on?
It's a unique question. In general, when the leaders make the commitments and write them down, they know they can fulfill them. And they want to, right? So if they don't do it 100%, then we can hold them to account and say, why not? And sometimes there's a bolt out of the blue, a deus ex machina. Oh, COVID. That meant that they had to put their money there and not on other things. But Donald Trump is not formally or informally bound by the Johannesburg commitments, because none of his people, let alone him, were at the table, so he wasn't part of them, all right? But as we move towards his summit, he may see the value of implementing some of the commitments made here that he knows he needs to act on in order to take care of his mega base and the people of the United States back home. Let's just take one. Critical minerals, right? The U.S. doesn't have enough, if it stays home alone, of any of the 60 critical minerals on their list. South Africa does. A new mine just opened here. Ramaphosa was there. Platinum, palladium. For Canada, it's graphite, uranium. We're the number 3 producer of the world. Oh, potash. That's on the list. Big fertilizer, food and agriculture. Canada's number 1 in the world. And nickel and copper and so on down the line. So Donald Trump needs Africa, Cobalt in the Congo and elsewhere, to run his economy and even his nuclear weapons deterrent, the uranium, back home. So Donald Trump's America needs the rest of the G20 probably as much as, maybe even more, than the rest of the G20 needs him. That's a particular form of equality, if you will. That means another check mark for the overarching theme of the Johannesburg summit here.
With regards to BRICS, the G20, G7, where do they overlap and work together? Where do they differ? How does it all work together in the global cooperation picture?
They overlap a lot, but more importantly, the world needs all 3 summits each year. a crisis breaks out in, say, February, and the leaders just go, oh, we'll only trust the G20, so let's wait till December 13th, Donald Trump's time, until we get together to address it, right? The G7 one takes place in late spring, early summer, so that's the first kick at the can. The BRICS, typically early fall, summer, so you get a second kick at the can, and then G20 at the end, a third kick at the can. And because the leaders overlap, right, all the BRICS leaders, the big traditional ones, are members of the G20. Same with the G7, right? So those ones have already had one or two kicks at the can before you get to the G20, right? So it's really, if you look at the overlapping membership, it's really 3 summits a year. Although we really do need the G20 to go back to full-time work. For the first couple of years, they did 2 summits a year. Then they went into semi-retirement. But now that we face more crises than just a single one, the American and global financial crisis, 2008-9, 2 summits a year. Modi did it 2 years ago, so let's try and do it next year too.
In closing, what has the highlight been of your visit?
The highlight of my visit is the people of South Africa. Canada was the first country in the world outside of South Africa to make Nelson Mandela a Canadian citizen. Was the first member of the Commonwealth to say in 1960, 61, including at a Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, apartheid South Africa is not one of us. It's suspended until it sees the light, which it did when the Nelson Mandela era began. So we've long been soulmates, politically, but also personally, kith and kin with South Africa. My son-in-law speaks Ndebele, one of the official languages. Born in Zimbabwe, worked in, Botswana, next door. Met my daughter there. They were working on AIDS awareness and AIDS prevention, the number one killer in South Africa still. So it feels like coming home because my city, over half the people were born outside Toronto, all right? So you just look at the streets, they look like South Africans. But sadly, they don't speak as many languages as the average South African does. So we have a lot to learn from South Africa to help us lift it up in so many ways. And finally, I have to mention the pinotage, all right? And the rest of the delights of South African food and agriculture and drink.
Thank you for making time and the contribution that you've made, not only to SA, but to the globe.
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Guys, thank you. Palatable Politics, like, subscribe, share. TJ Maslela, back again, Palatable Politics, reporting live from the G20. I'm here with one of the people that have participated in the whole process from government. He's the Deputy Minister of DIRCO, Mr. Alvin. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tapelo, and thanks for having us. And I think you should know by now that we had a resounding, successful G20 presidency.
What made it a success?
Well, I think when you look at, apart from the optics that ordinary people look at the organization of the G20, the infrastructural makeover in the city of Johannesburg. So let me also comment Mayor Dadamore for what he has done, and we hope that that will be the continuation beyond our presidency, that the city of Johannesburg will be in such impeccable condition. That is what our people actually deserve. We also want to thank South Africans, of course, Tapelo, for their support and their appreciation and reviews that we have received because indeed this was the first G20 on African soil led by President Ramaphosa. So this built on a success during our BRICS summit, and we managed actually to pull it off. Of course, for us as policy makers in government, we have set a thematic approach out for us, obviously underpinned by solidarity, sustainability and equality. And if we should measure where we are, you look at the 30-page Leaders' Declaration, it's the sum total of our collective effort and knowledge from not only the South African Foreign Service, but across all 13 working and engagement groups, making sure the high deliverables of our task forces that we identify, coupled with our strategic priorities, becomes a reality. So what makes it successful is that we have a Leaders' Declaration, a 30-page, that was negotiated throughout the year on text-based, line by line. And there's consensus that we require the work of the G20 to continue as an important mechanism to deepen multilateralism, but also to configure the world financial and economic architecture in the benefit of all, not only G20 member states. So I think we are exciting that the world have agreed that the responsibility that South Africa was entrusted to has been executed par excellence. They have agreed and concurred with us that we have a unique collective responsibility to ensure, the world in 2030, on the occasion of the conclusion of the target of the Sustainable Development Goals, there will be a bit more energy and there will be more financial resources dedicated to that cause.
The declaration. Let's start with what consensus, or rather what compromises were made by our presidency to ensure that we reached that consensus to get a declaration that was adopted unanimously.
Well, all of us, all Sherpas have worked in terms of our three strategic thematic areas and 4 strategic objectives. So we had our own ambition in terms of the language. What substantively for us in South Africa, our ambition was to ensure that we amplify the plight of the African continent. That was achieved. You would recall that important discussions on debt sustainability for low-income countries was a hallmark of our presidency, coupled with the harnessing of the critical mineral strategy. So just those 2 strategic pillars was uniquely embraced by heads of states and of government of the G20 in the plenary session, which we just concluded. So we have led, obviously, Tapelo, with humility, but with decisiveness. And I think this is what everyone appreciates, that we have humbled ourselves through our G20 presidency, but we knew that on the occasion of the Leaders Summit, that humility should be anchored on a steadfast conviction to do what is right in the interest of the African continent, which we presented together with the African Union, of course.
What was the intention of getting the declaration passed on the first day?
It's what you call diplomatic mastery. Statecraft was at play. We thought that, look, we should test the attitude of the leaders in relation to the draft leaders declaration, whether we are all uniquely at one, so that we don't open up the G20 leaders summit in relation to anxiety and mobilization that could have taken place, beyond the first day, which could have adversely affected the G20 summit. So unique diplomatic mastery from President Ramaphosa to do that. And once that has been done, we then were able to engage with the plenary interventions from heads of states and of government. And we had plenary presentations and engagements on the margins as it relates to the inequality report that was commissioned, the issue about the cost of capital. So I think we where we are today as South Africa is we have demonstrated that when this nation are at one in terms of its common interests and our common ambition, that the South African people and the South African government can basically achieve anything that it puts its mind to. So I think for us, they say Rockefeller, it was an absolute masterpiece, and we emerge here being more positive, being more optimistic. This is reconcilable with the good fortunes economically that we're experiencing currently as South Africa. And we do think that exposing the South African country to the multiplicity of world leaders will ensure there is a political currency through tourism that we are going to experience to a more renewed and strengthened foreign direct investment. So this was obviously, it should be seen as part of our efforts to reshape the economic fortunes of our people, Tapero.
With that said, successfully having hosted this G20, what has it done for the global political climate, especially considering the global south, global north relations?
Yes, I think there was unity of purpose between your more industrialized economies and economies from the global south, such as ours. So there was unity of purpose that you require, for example, one important catalyst to our economic debate was the issue about climate financing for just energy transition partnership. And there was a resounding acknowledgement that the future is decarbonization, the future is the green economy, and leaders have made an express commitment to work with countries such as South Africa to do good on their climate commitments that they have made and in other multilateral structures such as the conference of the party, the COP processes. So I think for us, we have been able to, construct a situation where there's consensus on the need for a multipolar world, and that multipolar world, in essence, should expressly find residence in the deepening of multilateralism.
What's the biggest takeaway from you?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the most important economic nations have agreed that they need each other, that our mutual concern on economic difficulties is a catalyst for our collective future. So, your most industrialized economies have agreed that for them to continue to grow at the pace in which they want to, they require to invest in your emerging economies, in particular in Africa and in the developing South. So that's one of your biggest takeaways. And obviously the second, not necessarily being subordinate, was the debates on cost of capital. Now, that is significant because cost of capital, debt sustainability issues, debt financing, it's critical when we speak about economic and financial architecture. And that is actually why the G20 has been, established. So those two, for me, uniquely are what we call, the imagination that we had when we assumed the presidency. And we then work towards ensuring that we canvas, we mobilize, we engage knowledge partners, especially, the fact that we convene a social summit on the eve of the G20 presidency to ensure that when we speak, we don't only represent the state, but we represent the interests of non-state actors, civil society organizations. So I think we have once again proven that if we keep our eye on the ball, that we can perform wonders. And I have heard many South Africans on social media have said that they want this consistency, this dedication to go beyond the G20. So those are the discussions we'll have with President Ramaphosa, of course, Tapero.
One last thing. You mentioned the debts and inequality, and basically a lot of African countries owe, whether it's the Bretton Woods institutions, a large amount of debt at interest rates that are not sustainable. Yeah. What was the posturing or position of the countries that are primarily responsible for the Bretton Woods institutions, and who would have one way, whether indirectly or indirectly, been responsible for the debts that was created or owed to them?
Yeah. Remember, we have World Bank and IMF. Now, South Africa are shareholders in those institutions. What we have been seized with is to ensure the makeup, the composition of IMF and World Bank reflects, the presence of more members from the global South, and that has started actually to happen, where they have, increased representation at both the World Bank and IMF for representation from the global South. So that was key. Of course, the second issue is to ensure that our fellow members of G20 understand their important responsibility in terms of debt financing. Because debt financing, there's a critical role when you speak about debt financing as it relates to how credit rating agencies look, for example, at the African continent. And we have suggested to them that the fact that, the AU Commission have, successfully launched the African Credit Rating Agency is an important mechanism which should serve as part of an addition to the existing repository which these credit rating agencies look at when they assess Africa, because most of the time they assess the African continent based on a pessimistic market sentiment. So we have obviously, engaged in a discussion of more desirable, variables that must make up their assessment. And your African credit rating agency will be one of that, coupled with existing institutions such as your APRM and Outer NEPAD. So I think the fact that we have listened to their interventions in plenary on debt financing, on cost of capital, on critical minerals, suggests there is good faith. So we take leave, obviously, Tapelo, from this occasion to thank all members, of the G20 that have accepted our leadership and have supported our work done through the Sherpa track and through the finance track. So we obviously want to also appreciate the multiplicity of actors that has been involved in delivering a par excellent G20 presidency.
Guys, before I close, there's just a funny story I would like to tell. Our very first interview as Palatable Politics was with the Deputy Minister, and he tolerated me while I was trying the intro about 6-7 times.
Yeah, yes. Look, the Fourth Estate has an important role to play, so I also want to congratulate you for the work that you've done, and we will support that because we need multiple avenues of reflecting on the work that government does apart from your conventional media. So good luck to you, Tapela.
Thank you very much, and congratulations once again. Like, subscribe, share, Palatable Politics. We're here with the Minister of Tourism to give us insights as to this journey. Well done on a successful event.
Yes.
Can you give us some insight as to the impact that this has had on tourism?
It's huge. I think tourism is the biggest beneficiary of the whole G20 presidency because remember it started from January already. We have got more than 135 business events that we hosted. The first 9 months we got 1.1 million more tourist arrivals in our country compared to the previous year. And then the other good news, of course, that for the first time the number of American visitors coming to our country has overtaken the United Kingdom. And so it's very positive. We must not just plan to ride on this positive wave and continue to market our country with the new visa regime that we've tested now on the G20, the electronic travel authorization, immediately open up the market to China, India, Indonesia, Mexico, G20 countries. It's an enabler for us to grow tourism. And of course, I'm lobbying all the countries here to get more direct flights to South Africa because we have now got the simplified visa regime.
In this journey, we've seen business, politics via government, and also the GNU all work together. Has it been as smooth as it looks?
Definitely. We have got a joint plan for tourism. It's called the Tourism Growth Partnership Plan, conceived and conceptualized and put together with the private sector. So now we hold each other to account. We set our own targets. And we must just continue to build on these relationships because government cannot do it alone. We need to collaborate with the private sector. And I pray that it will continue.
In closing, the highlights of this whole G20 for you?
The highlights most definitely is the coming together of the world leaders stage on the stage here, and that everything went smooth and seamless, and a lot of first-time visitors came to our country, and they said that they are coming back. But I'm very happy with South Africa's performance, and I want to congratulate all South Africans. And of course, we're doing this on behalf of the continent, so God bless Africa.
TJ, once again, coming live from the G20 Summit. I'm here with the Commissioner of the Border Management Authority, who was responsible for the borders, everyone coming in and out, and he had to give us insight as to how he did it as a commissioner himself. Congratulations. How did you do it?
Thank you very much. So basically what we have done is that you will remember that as the BMA, just 6 months in operation in 2023, we were confronted with having to facilitate the movement of heads of state for the BRICS Summit. So during that time, we realized that there are a lot of errors, that we did. We did not do much of the work ahead of time in terms of making sure that the people that were to come to the country were ready in terms of documents, also in terms of, for example, agricultural biosecurity things, to say these are the things that are not required and all of that. So because of that, we had a lot of challenges where there were people that came through into the country. Some of them were supposed to come with visas, they didn't have visas. Some of them were supposed to come with diplomatic passports, which did not require visas, but they came with ordinary passport with required visas. So that's a difficult processing that we had to do. So this time around, based on the lessons of that time, what we had to do, we engaged with our colleagues from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, and then we went out there and spoke to all the countries through DIRCO to make sure that we actually tell them what are the requirements for them to enter the country and what are the do's and don'ts. So on that basis, people actually complied. And effectively from Thursday as well as Friday, as we were processing the people coming through into the country, we were able to do so incident-free. All of the people actually complied in terms of all the documents.
Without being controversial, we saw what happened with Pastor Bushiri when he left.
Yeah.
Is there any of that we could suspect be happening in all of the movement of the leaders and private planes, etc.?
Yeah, you see, firstly, I want to confirm that all the leaders that came, especially those that came with the private jets that are owned by their own military, so the air forces, those airline or aircrafts are actually parked in Tambo International Airport, Lanseria International Airport, together with Waterkloof Air Force Base. So those aircrafts are under supervision, or they are under guard, as it were, by members of the police service, but also members of the BMA border guards. So on that basis, there is no way that there will be any kind of a nefarious act, because when they come back, for them to go into the aircrafts, there's going to be targeted processing, and of course we are going to be making sure that everybody that exits gets accounted for. Obviously, in terms of the activities of what happened during the time of Bushiri, we were not there, as the Border Management Authority. We do not necessarily know what might have actually happened. But in terms of our current operations, we definitely account for everybody's movement. And we have to make sure everybody is being properly processed in terms of immigration.
With regards to the process that happened here, the accreditation, the receiving, etc., there was a lot of technology used, whether it's face recognition, scanning, etc. How far are we from implementing a system like that on our borders for people coming in and leaving, saying with facial recognition, etc.?
Yeah, let me indicate that if you were to go to Tambo, even now during this period, we have started to pilot something called ETA, Electronic Traveler Authorization. And indeed, it is a system that uses facial recognition. We just only have 5 cubicles that we were targeting travelers who needed visas to come into South Africa. In this case, we talk about the Chinese, we talk about the Indonesians, the Mexicans, and few others. Those ones, we process them through the ETA system, through facial recognition. So on that basis, yes, indeed, we are moving in that direction. Our intention is that this pilot is going to run now during G20 is going to run even now during the festive period. And then after that, when the dust has settled, we are going to expand it across all our various ports, and we are going to move directly into facial recognition with the intention to also start avoiding issues of passport stamping, as most of the other advanced countries are doing.
Thank you for making time, and once again, congratulations for everything you've done here, making this seamless and keeping us safe.
No, thank you very much. As I'm talking now, I'm going to Tambo. Some of the heads of state are actually starting to go to exit this afternoon. Yesterday, we were able to exit the Prime Minister of the UK, the head of state of Ireland, as well as the one for Syria actually. Yeah, because the one who was talking here was for Turkey. So effectively, we started yesterday. And as we speak now, since the morning, the president of Namibia also exited. Now we are actually going to Tambo to make sure that those that are exiting today, they are processed seamlessly out of the country. The majority of them are going to start leaving from tomorrow. We are very much ready to make sure that there is a seamless processing as they leave the country.
One last thing, as you're saying, I got reminded. With regards to African Free Trade Agreement and trying to push trade in African countries and reducing whether it's border customs, etc. How easy or difficult is it to do that in a meaningful way that but pushes for easier trade amongst African countries, but still protecting our borders and our sovereignty? How are you guys going to go about that?
You know what, there's a lot of work that we are doing on trade facilitation. I want to confirm, I think you will be aware that the One-Stop Border Post Bill has just been passed by the National Assembly. It is then going now to go to the National Council of Provinces. Once it is passed, we are going to implement the One-Stop Border Post. That is the first thing. Secondly, you will be aware that we are now at the final stages of the public-private partnership for the redesigning and redeveloping of our top land commercial ports. We talk here about Bait Bridge to Zimbabwe, Libombo to Mozambique, Maseru Bridge and Fixberg to Lesotho, Oshuk to Eswatini, and Kofontaine to Botswana. All these ports are going to be redesigned and redeveloped. We are going to have lane for the trucks. Our intention is to make sure that we have a non-stop border post in terms of the movement of trade. We have started conversation with our immediate neighborhood, whether it's Zimbabwe, Lesotho, Namibia, Botswana, Eswatini, and all of those, to make sure that we are going to then register all the freight forwarders under what we call authorized economic operators. When those ones are registered with us, they are going to be pre-screened and pre-approved inside the country by customs. When they arrive at the port, we are just going to use what we call number plate recognition, and then the boom will just open, they will just drive through. That is to make sure that we implement this Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We are advancing intra-Africa trade, but also to make sure that we do what we call your sub-regional economic integration. All of these things that are being spoken about, including what is in the declaration of the G20, we are doing work on the ground to make sure that actually it becomes real, and Africans ultimately will start to see the benefit of what has been spoken about here.
Thank you very much. Guys, that was the Commissioner of the BMA, the Dr. Mike Masiapato. Thank you very much. Safe travels, congratulations once again. Palatable Politics, like, subscribe, share. TJ Maslela once again coming from G20. I'm here with one of the people that participated in the process and is also an activist and professional that addresses economic injustice and inequality. Nabil Ahmed from Oxfam. Welcome, and can you give us an insight as to the process of getting to this declaration and the role of economic injustice in all of it?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on. And I'll start by saying that there's something historic that's taking place here, which is for the first time for a world leaders meeting, we've seen that the issue of the inequality emergency has been put center stage. South Africa, for its G20 presidency, set up something called the G20 Extraordinary Committee of independent experts on global inequality, and it delivered a very strong report. And that report showed that in the same way that the world knows that we face a climate emergency, we also face an inequality emergency. And we saw this presented, and we saw leader after leader say, yes, this is serious. We do face an inequality emergency. And that is a breakthrough that deserves recognition. There's also something practical that's taken place from here, which is to say that the committee that was set up proposed that the world needs something called the International Panel on Inequality. In the same way that the world has something called the IPCC to help us understand climate change, these leaders supported the proposal to say, yes, let us now have a body that shows us the issue of inequality at the international level. And South Africa supported it, Brazil supported it, Spain supported it, some other governments came behind it as well. That is a breakthrough, a practical breakthrough that can help the world to address inequality.
So we all agree inequality is a problem, and happy that that is the outcome of the report and they're taking it seriously. However, how do you now in a meaningful way address inequality?
This is such an important question because the truth is, can the G20 help us to address inequality? Yes, but ultimately, leaders of every government on the planet have huge scope to address inequality themselves. That can mean, for example, taxing the ultra-rich, taxing big corporations. That is a step that they can take. It's a case that over the last few decades, we've seen tax rates for the rich being brought down. They're paying less than janitors, less than daycare workers. That's not fair, so they can tax the ultra-rich. Number two is that they can invest in public goods, public services like universal healthcare, like universal education. This is one of the most powerful ways that we can address inequality. And again, we can look at examples. Look at, for example, Thailand, and there's other countries that have shown we can do this. And the third action, TJ, is to rewrite the rules of the economy, rewrite the regulations. What do I mean by that? I mean breaking up monopolies. We shouldn't have so much power in our economies controlled just by a handful of corporations. That's bad for the economy. It's also bad for small businesses. It's bad for ordinary people. And here's another rule that we can change. We can raise minimum wages to a living wage as a sure way to decrease inequality and lift people from poverty. Mexico is an example of a country that in recent years has actually increased the minimum wage, and by doing so has contributed to reducing inequality and lifting millions of people from poverty. The issue is this: inequality is not inevitable. It's not like the weather. It's not like something that just happens. It is a choice. It is a choice for leaders, and they need to choose the interests of ordinary people over the billionaires.
Economists will always argue that when it comes to if you raise the minimum wage, it means that jobs are going to fall off. How true is that in a lived reality?
There are many business leaders who actually say the opposite, who actually say there's considerable scope for us to raise wages. We also know from an economic perspective that that is a sure way to generate greater investment in the economy. People have more money in their pockets to be able to spend to generate a healthier economy. And the truth is, we also know of some businesses who are actually taking action themselves to raise minimum wages higher. Here's the other point, is that you look at some countries that have actually taken action on wages, and they are much more prosperous economies that are showing that economic dynamism is possible. I mentioned Mexico, I mentioned Spain. Again, the economic evidence in this new era is clear that actually reducing inequality, putting in policies that can help ordinary people, like minimum wages, like taxing the ultra-rich, isn't just the morally right thing to do. It actually helps the economy, and it actually helps also protect democracy. I say that with an underlining here, because we're not just talking about slightly bad levels of inequality. We've heard here that we face an inequality emergency. Too much power is in the hands of too few people who have too much wealth. That is where we are, and that actually corrupts democracy. This is why we're saying action is urgent, and these kinds of policies to redress inequality, to curtail the power of oligarchs, is urgent and necessary.
Going back to one of your previous roles where you dealt with racial inequality or so, and we obviously have seen that inequality is largely based, or there's a strong correlation along racial lines. How do you make policy that is going to address that based on the racial inequalities?
This is such an important question because we know in many countries, and I can give you one example from the US, we know from many countries that there has not been anywhere near the progress that we need to see on the issue of racial inequality. For example, the racial wealth gap in the United States, there was some evidence that came out a few years ago which showed that it was close to its same level of 1950 today, right? The truth is that economic inequality and racial inequality are extremely closely correlated and connected to one another. The same goes for gender inequality. The starting point has to be to address the deep economic discrimination that exists in our economy. We know that policies like investing in universal public goods, universal healthcare, universal education, that doesn't just reduce economic inequality, it also reduces racial inequality. It raises the bar for all, because we know who is left behind, and in country after country, it's people on the lines of class, race, and gender. So for me, this is an absolutely essential starting point. And we should also look at those policies which we know can significantly and particularly redress racial inequalities. I will not pretend to be an expert on South Africa, and I know there's amazing work by leading South African activists, advocates, experts on this issue. But I know in other countries, policies, for example, like, injecting good quality union-backed government jobs is a sure way to reducing racial inequality. Policies like good universal social protection, you know, and therefore having public goods like healthcare and education, but also ensuring that people have, you know, the financial ability to be able to get by. These also help reduce racial inequality. There's so much that can be done. There are policies, a number of policies that can help reduce these inequalities, and there are governments also that show that it can be done.
In the States, we've seen President Trump's position or posturing towards South Africa and the G20 summit this year. What's the experience or the posturing of the American citizens?
What you will find is that the issue of inequality is felt by people in country after country. We see it here in South Africa. The truth is that there are ordinary people across the United States, like there are across Europe, who are also outraged about extreme levels of inequality. And now more recently, we've seen how people are very angry about how the Trump administration has been passing policies, for example, that take away, really necessary support on healthcare, on food, as well as other policies. We've also seen such anger towards policies that cut taxes for the ultra-wealthy. The truth is that, ordinary Americans, they support across the country more progressive policies. And something that we need to say as well here is that they support issues, like international support for others. What I'm seeing actually, and especially now being here in South Africa, traveling across the United States, as well as being in Europe, that there is a working class solidarity that exists between people across the world, a global working class solidarity. And you can even say a global ordinary people solidarity. It's important for us to insist and underline that the divides are not between people between countries, or people between races, or people between or between genders, but actually between the real drive is being driven by those at the very, very, very top and ordinary people in country after country.
How was your experience of this G20 held in South Africa?
It's been a very positive experience. And it's a first G20 on African soil. And it's a G20 that has showed leadership in very South African style, if I can say so. And one of the things that has been pleasing to see, TJ, is that clearly this G20 was under pressure from the US administration very clearly. And there was a moment where many were feeling spooked by the ghost of Donald Trump. He wasn't here, but the ghost was here in many respects. And there was pressure to, water down the declaration or even not have a declaration at all. South Africa stood firm. South Africa stood firm to get the G20 to a leaders' declaration. And it also broke through a victory for multilateralism. That is to be celebrated. Now, I would say as well that it's very disappointing that rich countries, spooked by the ghost of Donald Trump, watered down the language in the declaration. We wanted to see a much stronger language on taxing the rich, like Brazil did. We want to see stronger language on solving the debt crisis. And we know that there was pressure there to reduce that language, the strength of that language. So that is disappointing. But the big lesson here is South Africa's leadership of this G20 has shown that countries don't need to be scared. Has shown that countries can stand firm. And that is not a lesson that ends here in Joburg. It's a lesson that should be carried through to the international arena for the US G20 and for years ahead. Thank you very much.
Lastly, on the US G20,
yes,
what can we expect from the US presidency?
Yeah, so there's a need to be very concerned. We know what the international economic policy agenda of the Trump administration is and has been. It includes, for example, reducing tax, giving tax breaks to big corporations and gutting taxes for the ultra-rich. It includes, for example, deregulation, It includes slashing of life-saving aid. So shouldn't be around waiting to see what this agenda might and might not look like, because we have a strong indication of the direction that we'll head in. Given that, it's very important for countries to be able to, as South Africa has shown, to stand firm and to basically say, let's draw a line here to ensure that we actually act in the interests of our ordinary citizens. There should be a red line against an inequality fueling G20 presidency for next year.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Guys, thank you. Palatable Politics, like, subscribe, share.